Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're taking on the role of anatomical detectives. We're going to decode one of the most reliable and honestly fascinating biological puzzles in veterinarian science, how to estimate a horse's age just by looking at its teeth. It's a literal masterclass in forensic biology, and by the end of this, I promise you'll have a totally new appreciation for the absolute precision that a simple bite can reveal.
So let me ask you this. How would you score right now on the aging of horses? If you were standing face-to-face with a mystery mouth today, could you spot the precise biological timers ticking away inside? Well, don't worry if the answer is no, because today we're building that observational toolkit, piece by piece.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our agenda for today. 1. The basics of equine teeth. 2. Eruption and coming into wear. 3. Reading the biting surface. 4. Tracking Galvayne's groove. And 5. The limits of dental aging.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, the basics of equine teeth. Our very first forensic clue is actually pretty simple. We need to figure out if we're looking at deciduous, meaning baby teeth, or permanent adult teeth. And as you can see here, there are a few huge giveaways. Baby incisors are much smaller, they look quite a bit whiter, and they have this characteristic neck, like a distinct narrowing right where the tooth meets the gum line. Permanent teeth, totally different story. They're much larger and feature a really prominent central groove. Now you might be wondering, why are the permanent teeth so much more yellow? It's actually because newly erupted adult incisors are covered in a yellowish layer of cement. As the horse ages, that cement slowly wears away to reveal the white enamel underneath. The baby teeth have already lost their cement layer, which is why they look so pearly white.
Let's look at this in practice. Over on the left, we've got a 2-year-old horse. Notice how tiny and white those teeth are? That is a full set of baby teeth right there. Now, compare that to the 6-year-old horse over on the right. Those are permanent incisors. They're noticeably larger, definitely more yellow, and if you squint a bit and look closely at the corners, you can see they're fully what we call in wear, meaning they're actively grinding along that occlusal or biting surface.
Moving right along to Section 2, eruption and coming into wear.
This table is essentially your ultimate cheat sheet for the early years of a horse's life. A horse's incisors emerge in a very specific, highly predictable sequence, always starting from the center of the mouth and working their way outwards. So the central incisors erupted around 2.5 years of age. Next up are the lateral incisors at 3.5 years. And finally, the corner incisors make their appearance at 4.5 years old. But actually, eruption isn't the whole story. It takes roughly 6 months for those newly erupted teeth to grow out enough to physically meet the opposing teeth and actually start grinding. We call that coming into wear. So centrals are fully in wear at 3 years, laterals at 4 years, and corners at 5 years. Basically, if you see a full set of permanent teeth all actively grinding together, you know for sure you're looking at a horse that's at least 5 years old.
All right, Section 3, reading the biting surface.
Now what's really interesting about this slide is that we are zooming in. Looking straight down at the lower jaw like this reveals an absolute mountain of information. Because a horse's diet requires constant chewing, it is constantly grinding its teeth down. And since the tooth is structured with these different, distinct layers of enamel and dentine, this grinding process acts like a cross-section that changes over time. It's fascinating. The animal is literally wearing its age right on its teeth.
So, what are we looking for? Well, the first key feature on this surface is the infundibulum, which is commonly called the cup. This is a dark, distinct depression right on the biting surface of young adult teeth. Since the tooth is constantly being sanded down by chewing, this shallow cup eventually just wears away completely. Once it's gone, all that's left is a tiny, pale remnant, and we call that the mark. The timeline for this is incredibly consistent. The infundibulum disappears from the central incisors at approximately 7 years old, from the laterals at 8 years old, and from the corners at 9 years old.
But wait, it gets better, because nature actually gives us a backup timer. As the tooth wears down and that cup disappears, a totally new feature starts to emerge, the dental star. These are transverse dark lines that show up right in front of where the cup, or the mark, is located. They're actually made of secondary dentine, which is stuff the horse's body lays down specifically to protect the sensitive pulp cavity as the top of the tooth wears away. Now, pay close attention to how this matches up with those disappearing cups. These dental stars appear sequentially. First in the central incisors at roughly 8 years of age, then the laterals at 9, and finally the corners at 10 years old.
Okay, let's map these definitions onto a visual to make it crystal clear. Take a look at this diagram. Label A is pointing to that transverse dark line near the front edge of the tooth. That's our dental star. Label B points to the dark, distinct depression. That is the infundibulum, or the cup. And label C shows exactly what happens when that cup wears down. It leaves behind that faint little mark. So by playing detective and assessing which teeth have cups, which have marks, and which have stars, you can pinpoint a horse's age with truly impressive accuracy, right between the ages of roughly 6 and 10.
Next up, Section 4, Tracking Galvayne's Groove.
I want you to meet Galvayne's groove. Look really closely at the upper corner incisor on this slide. Do you see that distinct, dark vertical line running right down the tooth? That's it. That is Galvayne's groove. It's basically a dark yellow line that forms because the yellow cement we talked about earlier stays completely intact inside this tiny indentation, while it gets worn away everywhere else to reveal the white enamel. Honestly, it acts like this incredibly visual, slow-moving biological progress bar for the horse's age.
The crucial thing here is tracking how this groove travels over time. It first appears right at the gum line when a horse hits exactly 10 years of age. As the tooth continues to slowly erupt downwards over the years, the groove extends further toward the biting surface. By 15 years old, it's made it exactly halfway down the tooth. By 20 years, it spans the entire full length, from the gum line all the way to the occlusal surface. Now, after 20, the new part of the incisor emerging at the top no longer has the groove at all. So as the tooth continues to wear away from the bottom, the groove appears to travel downward. By 25, it only exists on the bottom half of the tooth, and by the time the horse is 30, it's completely worn away and gone forever. I mean, think about that. It is a staggeringly elegant, naturally occurring timer tracking 3 whole decades of a horse's life.
And this brilliantly illustrates another major macro-level change we see in older horses. Just look at the young 6-year-old mouth on the left side here. The upper and lower incisors meet in a very upright, almost vertical way. Now look at the older horse on the right, the one with that visible Galvayne's groove. Notice how the teeth project forward at a really severe slant? As a horse ages beyond 10 years, the angle at which those upper and lower teeth meet begins to slope aggressively forward. This shift is known as the angle of incidence, and it is a massive visual giveaway that you're looking at a senior animal.
Finally, we reach Section 5, the limits of dental aging.
Now, as much as we'd like this to be perfect math, it's not. Sometimes you'll spot extra anomalies that can either really help or totally complicate your diagnosis. For instance, do you see that distinct hook at the back of the upper corner incisor? This happens because the upper tooth doesn't perfectly align with the lower one, which leaves that back edge completely unworn. This specific hook is generally only seen in horses older than 7 years. It's a fantastic extra clue, for sure, but it also reminds us that wear patterns rely entirely on the exact biomechanics of how an individual, specific horse actually chews its food.
And that perfectly brings us to the single most important rule of thumb from our source material today. Aging a horse by its teeth is not an exact science. It is a highly educated estimation based on biological tendencies. The research explicitly cautions that 2 different veterinary surgeons can easily arrive at entirely different conclusions about the age of a horse, simply by attaching more significance to one finding, like a cup versus a star, than another. You must always bear in mind that a minimum margin of error of 1 year, either way, absolutely exists, and the older the horse gets, the wider that margin of error becomes.
Well, we've covered a tremendous amount of ground today, from the very first eruption of a baby tooth to the complete disappearance of Galvayne's groove 30 years down the line. You now have the tools to look past a simple bite and actually read the cups, the marks, and the stars. The next time you find yourself near a horse, will you be able to peer past the lips and read the history written right there in their teeth? It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other animals are walking around right now with their entire autobiographies etched directly into their anatomy? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.